When Clara Whitmore brought the 16 llamas home, half the county slowed down to watch. It was late afternoon in western Oklahoma, the kind of dry orange evening when dust hung above the road like smoke. Clara's old blue pickup coughed up the gravel lane, with 2 borrowed livestock trailers rattling behind it. Inside, hooves slammed against metal walls, long necks jerked above the rails, dirty wool, sharp ears, wild eyes, and bursts of spit flashed through the gaps every time the trailers bounced over a rut. Earl Blevins was fixing a gate across the road when he saw her turn in. He stopped with pliers in one hand. "Clara," he called, "tell me those ain't what I think they are." Clara did not answer. Another pickup slowed, then another. By the time she backed toward the old holding pen, 3 trucks had stopped along the fence line, engines idling low in the dust. Everyone had heard about those llamas. They came from a failed petting farm north of the county line. Nobody wanted them. They kicked, they spat, they charged people. One had broken a man's wrist against a stall door. Another had chased a feed salesman over a pipe fence. The only reason Clara got them was because she agreed to take all 16 for free. Free was the only word that made sense to her anymore. She opened the first trailer door. The first llama out was tall and brown, with matted hair hanging from its chest and a mean sideways look in its eyes. It hit the ground hard, spun toward Clara, and struck one front hoof into the dirt. A man by the road laughed. "That one looks ready to bury her." Clara held the rope loose in her fingers and did not step back. She was not watching its teeth. She was watching its eyes. The llama turned its head past her, toward the pasture behind the barn. Out there, 73 goats grazed in grass that had been bitten too short. Some of the does were heavy with kids. Some were thin enough to show ribs. Beyond them, the north fence sagged in 3 places. Beyond that fence were the cedar breaks, where coyotes had been moving closer every week. One by one, the llamas came out like trouble with legs. They shoved each other, spat at the dust, kicked at the boards, and scattered across the pen. Earl shook his head. "Your daddy would have known better." The words reached Clara, but she did not turn around. From the road, it looked like madness. From where Clara stood, it looked like the last chance her family had left. Whitmore Ranch had not always looked so tired. When Clara was little, the pastures were fuller, the barn roof was red instead of rust brown, and her father, Walter Whitmore, could walk the north boundary before breakfast without breathing hard. He knew the land the way some people knew scripture. He could smell rain before the radio called for it. He could tell where goats had broken through a fence by the way the grass lay in the morning. He kept black notebooks filled with rainfall totals, kidding dates, hay prices, predator tracks, frost warnings, and small observations most people would have ignored. When Clara was 8, Walter set one of those notebooks on the hood of the truck and tapped the page with a pencil. "Don't just count the animals," he told her. "Watch what they're telling you." "What if they don't tell me anything?" Walter looked toward the pasture and smiled. "They always do. Folks just get too loud to hear it." Then came 2 hard years. The rain missed them first. Storms built over the western sky and slid south, leaving Whitmore Ranch under clouds that gave nothing. The grass thinned, the pond shrank, hay went from expensive to nearly impossible. Then the coyotes came down from the cedar hills at night, lean and bold, slipping through weak places in the fence and taking the smallest animals first. Walter and Clara patched holes with scrap wire. They hung old pie tins and solar lights along the weak stretches. Walter sat up some nights with his shotgun across his knees, listening to the dark. But the work had worn him down. The stroke came in February, on a morning so cold the water troughs froze solid. Clara found him beside the barn, one glove missing, his face pale and his words tangled. He lived, but he did not come back the same. His right hand shook, his speech was slow. The man who had once walked every acre now struggled to cross the kitchen without holding the counter. After that, the ranch became Clara's. Not officially, it happened in small, quiet ways. She started answering the bank calls. She loaded feed by herself. She learned which bills could wait 3 days and which ones could not. She lay under the old Ford tractor at night, with a flashlight between her teeth, trying to fix leaks her father would have found by feel. The numbers were worse than anyone outside the house knew. $96,000 still owed to the local bank. 73 goats left from a herd that had once been more than 200, a hay bill unpaid, a barn roof leaking over the kidding stalls, a north fence that needed replacing, not patching, a father whose medical bills arrived in white envelopes Clara stacked face down on the kitchen table. And there was Dale Hargrove. Dale owned the ranch east of town. Twice he had asked about buying the back 40. He said it kindly, as if he were offering help, but Clara knew the look in his eyes. The north pasture had the best windbreak, the only real shelter, and the old spring draw Walter had always refused to sell. The second time Dale came by, he leaned both arms on Clara's gate. "You're young," he said. "No shame in getting out before this place eats you alive." Clara stood on the other side with a feed bucket in one hand. "It's not for sale." Dale looked past her at the sagging barn roof. "Everything's for sale when the bank calls enough." She held his eyes, then turned and carried the bucket toward the goats. The bank had given her 60 more days to show income. If she lost the next kidding season to coyotes, she would not have enough goats to make a payment. If she missed another payment, Whitmore Ranch would stop being a family place and become a line item. The town knew enough to talk, but not enough to understand. At Miller's Feed and Hardware, men leaned on sacks of mineral mix and watched Clara walk in with bruises on her wrist from the llama's first week. The clerk rang up her wire panels and said, "Need anything else for that zoo you're building?" A laugh moved down the aisle. Earl Blevins stood near the counter with coffee in a foam cup. "That girl's gonna lose the whole place," he said. Another man answered, "By spring, Dale Hargrove will own that north pasture." Clara lifted a sack of mineral salt into her cart. The clerk smiled. "You sure you don't want dog food instead? Guard dogs make more sense than spitting giraffes." Clara laid a $10 bill on the counter. "Just the salt." It was the only thing she said in the store. The county agent came out 3 days after the llamas arrived. He was not cruel, but he looked at the holding pen the way people look at bad news they do not want to say out loud. One llama struck the gate so hard the chain jumped. Another spat across the pen and hit the side of a water tub. The agent turned to Clara. "I know you're trying to solve a predator problem," he said, "but this may create 3 more problems before it solves one. I know. You need better fencing, maybe a trained guardian dog, maybe night pens until kidding is over." "I can't afford a trained dog." "Then reduce the herd until you can protect what's left." Clara looked toward the thin does carrying the spring income inside them. "If I reduce the herd," she said, "there won't be enough left to save." The agent's face softened. "I'm not against you, Clara. I just don't want to see you get hurt." She nodded. Neither of them looked at the bank envelope sticking out of her shirt pocket. People mistook Clara's silence for uncertainty. It was not uncertainty. She had been raised by a man who believed land told the truth slowly, and only to people patient enough to keep returning. Walter had taught her not to argue with weather, animals, bankers, or gossip. The land did not care how convincing a person sounded. It only cared what worked. So Clara went home and worked. The first week was ugly in the dust, in the sweat, in the crack of wood breaking under hooves. On Monday morning, she tried to move the big brown llama into a smaller pen beside the does. She carried a sorting panel in both hands and stepped slowly, the way Walter had taught her to approach nervous animals. The llama stood still until she got within 10 feet. Then it lunged. The panel slammed back against Clara's shoulder. Her boots skidded. The animal's hoof struck the metal hard enough to ring through the yard. "Easy," Clara whispered, though her heart was beating in her throat. "I'm not here to fight you." The llama struck again. From the porch, Walter watched in his wheelchair, one hand curled against his chest. His mouth worked before the words came. "Angle," he called, rough and slow, "not straight." Clara glanced back. Walter lifted his left hand and tilted it. She understood. Do not push head on. Give the animal a path. Let it think the movement was its idea. Clara shifted the panel sideways, opening a narrow lane toward the adjoining pen. Dust crawled down her neck. A fly moved across her cheek. She did not swat it. The llama snorted, paced once, then stepped into the lane. Clara closed the panel behind him. Walter's hand fell back to his lap, but his eyes were bright. That evening, she wrote one word beside the llama's description: Judge. On Wednesday, a pale female with torn ears stood between the goats and the fence for nearly an hour, not eating, not pacing, only staring toward the sound of a neighbor's barking dog. When the dog barked again, the female moved 2 steps closer to the fence and made a low humming alarm. The goats drifted behind her without being pushed. Clara wrote mercy. On Friday, everything went wrong. A tall red llama with scarred knees broke through a weak panel and charged into the goat lot. The does scattered. One young goat slipped in the dust and caught her leg under a feeder. Clara dropped her notebook and ran. "Hey!" she shouted. "Turn!" The red llama swung toward her. For one breath, Clara saw nothing but chest, legs, and teeth. She grabbed the injured goat by the shoulders and dragged it clear as the llama struck the feeder, splintering one side. Pain flashed across Clara's thigh where a hoof grazed her. She fell hard, rolled, and came up with dirt in her mouth. The red llama stood over the broken feeder, snorting. Clara's hands shook. The goat limped behind her. Blood ran from a scrape on Clara's shin into her sock. From the porch, Walter tried to stand. "Don't," Clara called. He froze, gripping the railing. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with an ice pack on her leg and the bank envelope open beside her. Walter sat across from her, his right hand trembling against his cup. "I can sell the back 40, Clara said. Walter's eyes lifted. "I know you don't want me to. I don't want to, but if this goes wrong, we lose all of it." For a long time, Walter said nothing. Outside, the red llama paced under the security light. Finally, Walter pushed his black notebook toward her with his left hand. "Read Mason," he said. "I already did." Walter shook his head. Again, Clara opened the notebook to the old pages. Mason was the gray llama Walter had kept with the goat herd years ago. Mason had not been friendly. He did not like hands near his face. He did not like dogs. He did not even seem to like people much. But predator losses dropped the year Mason began living with the does. Coyotes that used to test the fence at night stopped coming so close. Stray dogs turned back before reaching the herd. Then Clara found the sentence she knew by heart. A mean llama is only trouble in the wrong place. Walter tapped the line with one shaking finger. "Place," he said. Clara looked out the window at the red llama. Not bad. Misplaced. The next morning, she did not put him back with the goats. She moved him to a narrow strip along the outer fence, between the herd and the cedar breaks. He could not reach the does, but he could see every shadow that moved beyond the boundary. When a coyote called at dusk, the red llama lifted his head and ran toward the sound. Clara named him Trouble. After that, the work became slower and smarter. She built small adjoining pens from old gates, hog panels, and wire pulled from abandoned fence lines. She let the goats and llamas smell each other through barriers. She moved hay racks so they ate near one another without fighting. She placed water tubs where the goats could retreat without bunching against a dead-end fence. Every morning, she walked the perimeter with a pencil behind one ear and Walter's binoculars around her neck. She crouched in the dust to study tracks. She checked hair on barbed wire. She watched which llamas stood alert at distant barking and which only cared about feed. There were setbacks almost every day. Mercy jumped a low panel and ran into the lane. Preacher kicked a feeder apart. Trouble charged the fence so hard he bent a post. Judge refused to move for 2 hours in the rain, blocking the gate, while Clara stood soaked beside him with a bucket of grain. "Move," she muttered. Judge stared past her toward the pasture. "Please move." He did not. From the porch, Walter gave a dry, broken laugh. It was the first real laugh Clara had heard from him since the stroke. She turned around, drenched and angry. "You think this is funny?" Walter lifted one shoulder. "Little." Clara stared at him, then at Judge, then at the mud sucking at her boots. Against her will, she laughed too. It lasted only a second, but it loosened something in the house that had been tight for months. September turned dry and brittle. The grass around the barn lost its last green. Clara rationed hay and hauled water twice a day because the trough line leaked faster than she could repair it. Coyotes came closer as the wild rabbits disappeared. Twice she found tracks along the outer fence. Once she found blood and hair where something had taken a feral cat near the equipment shed. At night, the howling started earlier. One evening, Walter sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open, his left hand resting on the page. Coyotes called from the north. Mason knew first, he said. Clara stood by the sink, washing dirt from her hands. What did he know? Walter took a breath. When fear moved. The words settled between them. By the first week of October, Clara had divided the llamas into 4 working groups. She placed the calmest but most alert ones with the pregnant does. She used the more aggressive ones along the outer pastures where coyotes tested the fence. She kept trouble in the adjoining strip until he stopped charging goats and began focusing on movement outside the pen. Judge became the center of the north group, always standing slightly apart, always facing the cedar breaks. The town still laughed, but not as loudly. A few people noticed Clara had not lost a goat in 3 weeks. Then 4. Then 5. But nobody said much about that. Most of them still believed Clara Whitmore was one bad night away from losing everything. That night came near the end of October. The day had been hot for the season, with a dull, airless heat that made the goats restless and left the sky colorless until sunset. No wind moved through the cedars. No birds called from the fence lines. The pregnant does were in the north pasture, closest to the dry creek bed. It was the weakest part of the ranch, but also the best sheltered. Before dark, Clara checked the fence twice. Judge stood near the far corner, watching the tree line. Mercy stayed close to the goats. Preacher stared toward the draw. Trouble paced the outside strip like he hated the whole world. Walter sat on the porch under a blanket when Clara came back. "Quiet," he said. Clara looked across the pasture. Yes, too quiet. She latched the gate and walked back to the house under a sky with no stars. Near midnight, she woke before she knew why. The house was dark. Walter's room was quiet. For 1 second, Clara heard only the refrigerator hum and the faint tick of the kitchen clock. Then the sound came again. A deep, harsh alarm from the pasture. Not a goat, not a dog, a llama. Clara was out of bed before the next call. She pulled on jeans, shoved her feet into boots, grabbed the heavy flashlight by the door and her father's old shotgun from above the cabinet. Walter's voice came from the bedroom. "Clara? Stay inside," she called. The goats screamed. She ran across the yard, the flashlight beam jumping over weeds, broken boards, and silver water tubs. As she reached the barn, the beam caught eyes beyond the north fence. 1 pair, then another, then 5 more. Coyotes. Not one hungry animal testing a weak place. A whole pack moved in pieces through the dark, circling from the dry creek side and the cedar break at the same time. Their eyes flashed green-white whenever Clara's light touched them. She heard their feet in the leaves. She heard the quick, thin yips as they spread out. The goats had bunched tight near the old shelter. If the coyotes broke through, the does would scatter. If they scattered, the weakest would fall. If enough fell, the ranch would fall with them. Clara lifted the shotgun but did not fire. The coyotes were too spread out and too hard to see cleanly. Then the first coyote slid under the sagging wire near the dry creek. Mercy saw it first. She screamed and drove forward, striking the ground inches from its face. The coyote snapped at her leg. Mercy jerked back. and Clara saw blood darken the wool above her ankle. "Mercy!" Clara shouted. The coyote lunged again. Judge moved. The big brown llama charged the weak corner with stiff, deliberate power, neck high, ears locked forward. The coyote twisted away just before Judge reached it, but another came through the brush to the right. Preacher met that one. He slammed his front feet down and threw his body sideways, cutting it off from the goats. Trouble hit the far line like a storm. The red llama raced the inside of the fence where 3 coyotes were trying to split the pasture. He struck the ground, screamed into the dark, and lunged so hard into the wire that one old post cracked at the base. The fence leaned. Clara's stomach dropped. If that section opened, the pack would pour through. She ran toward it with the shotgun in one hand and the flashlight in the other. A coyote slipped through a gap near the broken post and streaked toward the edge of the herd. The goats exploded. For one terrible second, the tight group broke. Hooves thudded. A doe went down. Dust rose white in the flashlight beam. Clara fired into the ground ahead of the coyote. The blast split the night. The coyote veered, but did not retreat. It circled low, looking for the fallen doe. Trouble came from the side. He charged so hard Clara heard his breath before she saw him. The coyote turned and snapped. Trouble struck with his front feet. The coyote rolled, recovered, and vanished under the fence with a yelp. Trouble stood over the fallen doe, sides heaving. For the first time since Clara had known him, he did not look angry. He looked like he had chosen. The standoff did not end quickly. The coyotes tested the dry creek gap. Judge met them there. They shifted toward the sagging corner. Trouble raced them on the inside despite blood running from a cut along his chest. Mercy limped but stayed near the goats. Preacher drove back 2 coyotes that tried to come through the brush behind the shelter. Clara moved along the fence with the light and the shotgun, yelling until her throat burned. "Get out! Get out of here!" From the porch, a second light appeared. Walter. He had dragged himself to the doorway and was holding the old porch lantern with his good hand. "Clara," he called, "go back inside." But Walter lifted the lantern higher. The light spilled across the yard, the barn, and the north pasture. It showed Clara the coyotes shifting in the brush. It showed the gap by the broken post. It showed Judge turning before Clara heard the next attack. "Left," Walter shouted. Clara swung the flashlight left. 2 coyotes rushed the dry creek gap together. Judge charged one. Preacher cut off the other. Clara fired into the dirt, close enough to throw dust into their faces. This time they broke. Not all at once. One shadow slipped behind a cedar. Another dropped into the dry creek. Another paused at the ridge before turning away. Judge stood at the fence until the last pair of eyes disappeared. Trouble kept pacing long after the dark went quiet. Mercy stood on 3 legs near the goats, trembling but upright. Clara did not realize she was shaking until she lowered the flashlight. She walked to the fallen doe first. The animal was alive, scraped along one side but breathing. "Easy," Clara whispered. "You made it." Then she turned toward the porch. Walter was still there, lantern shaking in his hand. For a moment, father and daughter looked at each other across the yard, both breathing hard, both too tired for words. Finally Walter said, "They held." Clara looked back at the pasture. "Yes," she said, "they held." By morning, the proof was written in the dirt. Coyote tracks circled the north pasture in overlapping lines. Near the dry creek, the soil was torn where they had tried to dig under. At the sagging corner, tufts of hair clung to the wire. Along the inside fence, llama tracks cut back and forth like patrol marks. The goats were tired and nervous, but alive. Not one was missing. Mercy's leg needed cleaning and wrapping. Trouble had a long cut across his chest. The fallen doe limped for 2 days. One old post was broken clean through, and 30 feet of fence had to be braced before sunset. It had not been easy. That was why it mattered. Earl Blevins was the first neighbor to stop that morning. He climbed out of his truck without his usual grin and stood by the fence. "What happened here?" he asked. Clara was wrapping wire around the broken post. "Coyotes." Earl looked at the number of tracks in the dirt. "How many?" "Enough." He looked past her at Mercy standing bandaged near the goats, then at Trouble watching him with open dislike. Earl removed his cap and rubbed the back of his neck. "I guess those spitting giraffes did something after all." Clara tightened the wire. They did their job. By noon, more trucks slowed along the road. By evening, people at Miller's Feed were no longer laughing. They were asking how many coyotes had come, whether the goats really all survived, and where Clara had placed the llamas. The county agent came back 2 days later. This time he brought a notebook. He stood outside the north pasture while Clara showed him the fence line, the track patterns, the water placement, the escape routes, and the way each llama held a different part of the boundary. "I thought you were guessing," he said. Clara looked toward Walter, who sat on the porch watching them. "No," she said. "I was listening." The agent wrote that down. When the first kids arrived, they came strong. Small bodies hit the straw under the patched barn roof, blinking into cold light, while Clara moved from stall to stall with towels, iodine, and feed buckets. The does held milk better because they had not spent the fall being chased half to death. The losses stayed far lower than the ranches north of town, where coyotes had cut deep into herds that winter. By spring, Whitmore Ranch had more healthy kids than anyone expected. Because so many neighboring ranches had lost animals, breeding stock brought a better price. Clara sold carefully, keeping the best females and letting go of enough young goats to make the overdue interest payment. Then she made another payment. Then she bought real fencing supplies for the north line instead of scrap wire and hope. Dale Hargrove stopped asking about the back 40. At Miller's Feed, the same men who once joked about Clara's free llamas began lowering their voices when she walked in. One of them finally approached her near the mineral blocks. "How do you tell?" he asked. "Tell what? Whether a llama will guard or just cause trouble." Clara lifted a sack of feed. "Watch what it faces when it's afraid." By the end of the year, Whitmore Ranch was not rich. The roof still showed rust. The pickup still coughed on cold mornings. Clara still worked until her hands cracked and her shoulders ached. But the ranch was alive. The bank had stepped back. The herd was growing. The north fence stood straighter than it had in years. And out in the pasture, 16 llamas nobody wanted moved like watchmen among the goats. Walter Whitmore lived long enough to see them there. On warm evenings, Clara helped him onto the porch, where he sat wrapped in a blanket with the black notebook on his lap. Judge often stood on the rise near the cedar break. Mercy stayed near the does. Trouble patrolled the far fence as if the whole ranch had offended him personally. One evening, Clara opened the notebook to the old page about Mason. "Should I write them in?" she asked. Walter looked at the pasture for a long time. "All of them," he said. So beneath her father's fading handwriting, Clara wrote the names of all 16 llamas, not because they were gentle, not because they were easy, but because they had earned a place in the record of the land. The town remembered the story as the night predators surrounded Whitmore Ranch and the llamas held them back. But Clara knew the real story had begun earlier than that. It began when everyone else saw worthless animals and she saw unused purpose. It began when she trusted an old note from her father more than fresh laughter from the road. It began every morning she got up after doubt, after bruises, after bills, and kept working without applause. Years later, when younger ranchers came to ask about guardian llamas, Clara walked them to the north pasture and let them watch in silence. She showed them the fence, the water placement, the slow introduction, the careful pairing, and the months of failure before the night of proof. She never made it sound simple because it had not been simple. She never made herself sound fearless because most days she had only felt tired. But she always told them one thing her father had written long before the bank letters, before the drought, before the coyotes came close enough to test the porch light. A mean animal is only trouble in the wrong place. On Whitmore Ranch, Clara found the right place. And because she did, The goats lived, the debt was paid down, the back 40 stayed under the Whitmore name, and the old ranch did not disappear into somebody else's fence line. At sunset, when the wind moved through the dry grass and the cedar hills darkened to blue, Clara could stand by the gate and hear the quiet sounds of a place still breathing. Goats cropping grass, llamas shifting their feet, a loose chain tapping against a post. The old house settling behind her. She had not saved the ranch by shouting louder than the people who doubted her. She had saved it by watching closely, working quietly, and believing that sometimes the thing everyone laughs at is the very thing strong enough to stand guard when the darkness comes.